Madam President, I hear more and more from people in my own state of Vermont and from people, in fact, all over this country via email, through my website, who are wondering whether or not this great country is evolving into an oligarchic society. Historically, as I think most people know, the United States was the envy of the world for so many reasons. But one of the reasons economically is that in our country, there was always the belief that regardless of your income, you had the opportunity to move up the economic ladder. There was the reality, not just the belief, but the reality, that we had a great and expanding middle class. That if your dad and your mom didn't go to college, which was, in fact, the case in my family, you would have that opportunity to go to college and move up the educational ladder or the business ladder or professional field. And there was this feeling that economically what America was about and what we celebrated was the great middle class. And I think people today, both from an economic perspective and from a political perspective, are beginning in a very serious way to question that reality. And what they are looking at is that today in our country, we have the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth. And, you know, I think a lot of young people say, well, how could that be? In England, you have the Queen of England, you have all the lords and all the royalty and all over Europe. And we don't have that in the United States. Yet, the truth is that over the years, we have moved to a situation where in terms of wealth and income, we are now the most unequal society of any major industrialized nation on earth. And I keep mentioning one statistic because I don't hear too many other people talking about it, but we need to talk about it. And that is in terms of wealth. Wealth is what we own. Wealth is what we have accumulated over a lifetime of work. In terms of wealth, the top 1% in our nation owns 38% of the financial wealth of America. And I would ask those people back home who might be listening, what does the bottom 60% own? Top 1% owns 38% of the wealth. What do you think the bottom 60% own? They own 25%, 20%, 10%. What do they own? Well, the answer is they own all of 2.3%. All of 2.3% is what the bottom 60% of Americans own in terms of total wealth. So if you had a big pizza with 100 slices in it, one person would get 38% of those pieces of pizza if we looked at wealth, and the bottom 60% of the people would have to share 2.3% of the pizza. I don't think that that is what America is supposed to be about, and that situation is getting even worse. In terms of income right now, all right, everybody goes out and works, and you got millions of people today who are working longer hours and their income is going down. Their wages are going down. Maybe they're paying more for health care. Their pensions are going down. But in terms of all new income generated in this country, from the last statistics we saw, which were 2009 to 2012, in terms of all new income, 95% of all new income went to the top 1%. So more and more income goes to the millionaires and billionaires, while millions of people are working longer hours for lower wages, while we have the highest rate of childhood poverty at 22% of any major country on earth. Since 1999, the typical middle-class family has seen its income go down by more than $5,000. You want to know why people are angry, why people are concerned, why people are worried what is going to happen to their kids? Is because The median family income has gone down by $5,000 since 1999. Let me break it down even further. The typical male worker, that guy right in the middle, makes $283 less last year than he did 44 years ago. Imagine that. In the last 44 years, with all of the increase in productivity, with all of the robotics, with all of the space technology, all of the iPhones and iPads and everything else, where people are now producing much more, the typical male worker made $283 less last year than he did 44 years ago. The typical female worker earned $1,700 less last year than she did in 2007. Today in America, we have more people living in poverty than ever before, and that's 46.5 million people. And, Madam President, here is a fact that should frighten everybody, and that is half of Americans have less than $10,000 in their savings account right now. Can you imagine that? That means that if your car breaks down and you need that car to get to work, or you have a serious health problem and you don't have particularly good health insurance, there it goes. It goes. And then you talk about people who are getting older who have to retire. How do you retire with dignity if you have less than $10,000 in the bank? Well, you're going to get Social Security, and thank God you and I and other members here have fought hard to make sure that there were not cuts in Social Security that many people wanted. But is Social Security alone enough? The answer is no, it is not. What is happening in this country is that while the middle class shrinks, there is another reality, and that is the people on top are doing phenomenally well. They are doing phenomenally well. Today, we see a situation in which some of the wealthiest families in America, Koch brothers come to mind, I'll talk about them in another context, they are now worth $80 billion. In the last year alone, their wealth went from $68 billion to $80 billion in 1 year. 1 year, a $12 billion increase in their wealth. Sheldon Adelson, another billionaire who's got his name in the paper a whole lot recently by bringing prospective Republican candidates for the presidency to Las Vegas to talk to them and see what they have to offer him and how much money he will contribute to their campaign. He also saw a huge increase in his wealth over the last year. So what oligarchy looks like, what is the face of oligarchy? The face of oligarchy is what we see in Russia. And many people think about oligarchy, think of Russia. In Russia, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a small number of bureaucrats were able to steal a lot of public property, and they became multi-billionaires. They controlled oil companies, banks, gold mines, aluminum companies, television stations, and other state-owned companies, and that's how they became oligarchs. By 2001, 5 oligarchs controlled 95% of Russia's aluminum production, 40% of its copper, on it goes. And people say, well, oligarchy, that has to do with Russia. What does it have to do with the United States of America? Well, it has everything to do with the United States of America because that is the direction in which we are moving. Now, let me give you some example of what oligarchs do. When we think of oligarchy, we might want to think of a gentleman named Hank McKinnell, Jr., who was the CEO of Pfizer, the major drug company, from 2001 to 2006. And when he retired, he received a $188 million golden parachute. $188 million at the same time as the people in our country pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. That's oligarchy. When we think about oligarchy, we may want to think about a gentleman named Lee Raymond, who served as the CEO of ExxonMobil from 1993 to 2005. When he retired, and remember, this is at a time when the vast majority of the American people do not have the resources to retire with a shred of dignity. But when Mr. Raymond retired from ExxonMobil, he received a golden parachute, retirement benefits, of more than $320 million. $320 million. And that's at the same time when people in Vermont and all over this country are finding it harder and harder to pay for gas at the pump. And what oligarchy is also about is that in 2009, ExxonMobil, maybe the most profitable corporation in the history of America, did not pay any federal income taxes, even though in that year it earned $19 billion in profits. Madam President, when we talk about oligarchy, we might want to think about somebody like Jamie Dimon, who is the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase. And he recently received a 74% increase in pay, more than $20 million in total compensation. Now, interestingly enough, that's a pretty big salary, $20 million. What did he do to earn it? Well, during that same period, over the last year, the bank he runs, J.P. Morgan Chase, paid out over $20 billion in penalties to the federal government for financial fraud. So your reward after paying out $20 billion to the federal government in penalties for financial fraud is to get a $20 million compensation package. That's called oligarchy. No matter what you do, if you're at the head of a large financial institution, you're going to get rewarded for that. Oligarchy has a lot to do with a gentleman named William McGuire, the CEO of United Health Group from 1991 to 2006. And everybody knows the crisis that we're facing in health care. Everybody knows that tens of millions of Americans today, despite the Affordable Care Act, are still uninsured. And everybody knows that we spend more per capita on health care than do the people of any other nation. And yet, when this gentleman retired from United Health Group in 2006, he received a $285 million golden parachute. So we have the most dysfunctional healthcare system in the world, the most expensive healthcare system, tens of millions of people uninsured, yet the head of a major insurance company gets $285 million in retirement benefits. That is called oligarchy. But let me take oligarchy away from the economic realm and turn it into an area that I am, and many Americans are, very, very concerned about. Recently, we saw an interesting spectacle about politics that took place in Las Vegas. And that is that a gentleman named Sheldon Adelson, who is worth some $38 billion, who is maybe the world's largest casino magnate, not only in Las Vegas, but off the shores of China as well. He held a meeting in Las Vegas in which he brought forth Republican candidates who are interested in running for president. Now, here's the point. In the last presidential election, both President Obama and Mitt Romney spent a little over $1 billion in their campaign. Sheldon Adelson, if he provided more money into a campaign than both Obama and Romney spent, he would still have $9 billion more in wealth than he did in 2013. What am I saying? What I am saying is that we are moving toward a situation where people like the Koch brothers and Sheldon Adelson have so much money that it would hardly matter to them at all to write out a check which would be more than both Obama and Romney spent in the last presidential election. They could write out a check for $2 billion, and it would be an insignificant fraction of their increase in wealth over a one-year period. And, Madam President, as bad as that situation is, because of the disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, we may not have seen the worst yet. Judge Thomas of the Supreme Court, the most conservative member of a very conservative Supreme Court, he wrote an opinion which said, maybe we should look at doing away with all limitations on campaign finance. And many Republicans think that that is a great idea. Let's do away with all limitations. Now, in the real world, what does that mean? It means that billionaires, people who are worth $20 billion, in the case of the Koch brothers, $80 billion, if we moved in that direction and ended all limitations on campaign spending, they could sit in a room, and Madam President, you come from a state of Wisconsin, a moderate-sized state, they could write a check out for $50 million or $100 million, and it would not matter at all into a candidate for Senate or Congress or governor in Wisconsin or in Vermont or any place else. And I want people to take a deep breath and think about whether or not that is what we believe American democracy is supposed to be. When I grew up, what we believed that American democracy is about, and we still practice it to a large degree in the state of Vermont, where we have town meetings. In March, first Tuesday of March, people come out and they argue about the school budget, and they argue about other budgetary items, and every person has a say and every person has a vote. And I have done in my career hundreds and hundreds of town meetings where people from any walk of life walks in the door, can ask any question that they want, because I think what democracy is about is elected officials talking and communicating with people, regardless of their income, and listening to their comments and answering their questions. That's what democracy is about. I do not believe that democracy is about a handful of billionaires like the Koch brothers, like Sheldon Adelson, being in a position in which they can spend as much money as they want on any political race in this country. It is very hard for me to imagine how anybody could defend that as being democracy. It is not. It is oligarchy. It is the power of a handful of billionaires to control the political process. So, Madam President, both in terms of economics, where so few own so much and so many have so little, and in terms of politics, where a handful of billionaires increasingly are able to determine the nature of politics in America and who is elected and who is defeated, I think we as a nation have a lot of hard thinking in front of us. And what we have got to ask ourselves, are we going to fight for our democracy and an expanded middle class? Are we going to fight for a democracy where one person has one vote and billionaires cannot fight elections? To my mind, that is the most important issue that we face as a nation. And I hope the American people become engaged in that struggle, are prepared to take on the billionaires who apparently are not content to have $10 or $20 billion in wealth. They feel the need to have more and more and more, and to take that money out of the hides of working families and the elderly and the children and the sick and the poor. They want more tax breaks for billionaires, and then they want to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education, and every other program. that has importance to working families. So we need a very serious debate about these issues. We need millions of Americans to stand up and fight with us to defend American democracy and to stop this country from evolving into an oligarchic form of society. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.